Hello, my name is Jan Mercer-Doms. I'm the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. We are an ecosystem of brands for women, by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. Today, you're here with us watching Women in Money, brought to you each and every Thursday. Please make sure to join our YouTube channel to stay up to date on all of our content, and join us at joinmayshad.com, where you too can become a member of how we revolutionize how professional women connect, engage, and do business together. I'm here today looking forward to having a fabulous conversation with Nancy May. Nancy is the president and CEO of BoardBench, and Nancy just recently started a new organization called Caremanity that is dedicated to elder care and elder success. Welcome, Nancy.
Hi, Jan. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. So originally I reconnected with you after a period of time because I really wanted to talk to you about your board work. And now I'm so inspired by what you're doing with Caremanity. And so we're going to split the conversation today and talk about all of the different things that you're working on right now. And, one of the things I find to be so fascinating about the Mayshad ecosystem is that we're, diverse female corporate executives, business owners, entrepreneurs, from diverse industries, diverse job sectors, diverse company types. But one of the things that I really feel like we all share in common is the challenges and the opportunities associated with COVID. And one common theme that I hear over and over again is particularly related to the challenges with caring for elderly parents, particularly in a moment in time where there's so much anxiety and stress and concern around not being able to be there from a face-to-face perspective. Talk to us about your passion and your decision to actually bring your company to fruition.
Well, it started about 13 years ago, where it was the early stages of mom showing some signs of dementia. I didn't know what it was at the time. And but that's basically what it was, through they call mini strokes or TIAs. And over the course of time, I saw my folks deal with legal abuse, financial abuse. In fact, I looked at going and doing a FINRA complaint. That's how bad it was. That in itself is a whole nother story. Legal complaints, issues that we had, fraud, facility fraud, physical abuse, mental and psychological abuse, you name it, my folks went through it at some level of scale. And they were smart, talented people. So I was a business owner and been a smart business owner. My dad had been a business owner, ran a manufacturing company. And I dove into the research because, as they say in movie land, I was mad as hell and I wasn't going to take it anymore. And there was no reason why two smart, talented people over the course of the time who took care of myself and my sister should have to go through that. And I found that others were dealing with it too. So, I got calls and asking, what did you do? And I was a long distance caregiver. I still am. I'm in Connecticut. They're down. Well, my mom's now down in Florida. My dad passed away last year. But, there's a similarity to COVID because I was long distance to begin with.
Nancy, thank you, first of all, for sharing your story. And I'm wondering if there are red flags or tips or signs that you think that we should all be prepared for, because I think it's fascinating that for those of us who, no matter if COVID keeps us apart or not, but still many of us are in your situation in the sense of being separated by many states. And so what are some of the questions or some of the aha moments that, looking back now in hindsight, you realize were there, but maybe the dots just weren't able to be connected for whatever reason?
The whole aging process for our parents and even ourselves creeps up quickly, unless it's a major catastrophe or major event, a massive heart attack, a massive stroke, a fall of broken limbs, car accident, you name it. There could be something that happens, but usually it's slow and steady. And just keeping an eye on the little subtle changes. So my parents drove up to visit me and my husband, because my mom wanted to go to a college or a high school reunion up in Stamford, Connecticut, where she grew up. And when they got here, my mom knew how to get to my house. Her best friend lived in the town where I lived, and she would always come up and no problem. But she kept getting lost. And I remember it was pouring rain. My dad drove the whole way up. I'm like, please, Dad, I was like, take the plane. But there that in itself is another story which I could get in on a rant, but I won't. And I got a call in the pouring rain, and I'm hearing, "We're here." I'm thinking, where? Connecticut. It's like, it's a big state, Mom. Where is it? It turns out that they were in front of a liquor store and a deli, so they were fine. I said they had food and alcohol. Okay, and they shouldn't drive. But I had to go find them, and thankfully, I said just go to the deli, get the phone, and let me know where they are. So that was sort of the first question, and I was in denial. It was my husband who said, "There's something going on here that's not right." So it's those little tiny changes that you kind of overlook.
Nancy, in hearing what you're saying now, I can't help but think about and reflecting upon many of the conversations I've had with women in our ecosystem who have lost parents during this period of time, either due to COVID or due to the fact that, maybe parents didn't want to seek medical care out of fear for being exposed. And so then they self-withheld treatment from other conditions they may be suffering from. And understanding kind of the complexities of how one navigates the U.S. healthcare system isn't easy to begin with on a good day. And so what can you tell us about the way in which now even COVID has complicated just the experience of elder care for many of the individuals in your own network?
So I know several people who've lost parents and relatives through COVID as well, including in-laws, related through family. And the biggest thing I would say is if you have to call 911 and get a parent to an emergency department, that's probably the biggest challenge that you've got. If in fact they are not in a facility already, and even if they are, it's a problem. And being there, I'm a big advocate of always being by the side of somebody who's older. I don't care whether they have dementia or not, just because when you're in a state of stress, it's very difficult to speak for yourself, and you're scared. I mean, think about ourselves. If you've ever been in a 911 situation or emergency situation, you're not really sharp if you're laying there on a gurney. Right? It just doesn't happen. But a lot of ER departments or emergency departments are not allowing people in, although in some cases they are. And anything you can do to try and be there. My mom had a situation during COVID where we caught pneumonia early on. And so my lead aide, Millie, had said, "Nancy, I think we need to take her." And I said, "Fine, no questions, take her." She was allowed in the emergency department. But when it came time they wanted to admit her, they found just the beginning of pneumonia on a bottom lobe, which they could not have detected at home with a home X-ray, but they did with an MRI. They were able to do, or MRI. I'm not a medical professional. MRI CAT scan, but one of the more deeper ones. And they found it. And so I told the PA in the emergency department, I wanted his name. And I said, "Okay, here's the deal. If you will not let our lead aide up in the hospital, I want to know what your personal liability is, because you will be held responsible for my mom's death if anything happens." So I'm like a bull in a china shop where it's like, "Oh, lady, wait a second." But thankfully, our doctor knew the situation, knew our care at home, and said, "No, she can be released." We were able to handle everything in a home environment safer. But that's not always the case. So if that's a situation, get whatever support you can in the hospital, be there for them so that you have constant contact, not just every day, beginning in the morning, but, I'd say, every hour or two, so you know what's going on. I'm maniacal about it.
Let's take one step back, and I would love to get your thoughts on, from your experience so far, what does truly it mean to be an elder care advocate? Like, we often think about like being our own best patient advocates when we ourselves as adults are sick or require care. But what does it mean to really truly become an elder care advocate for an aging parent?
That's a big question. It covers legal, financial, medical issues. You could be dealing with family issues as well. It really means being able to, I say not forcefully, but gently step in and be at their side. And that's what a lot of people don't get. They think they come in, swoop down, and all of a sudden you're the parent to the parent. I don't believe in that. Your parents are still your parents. You are still the child. I don't care how old they are or how old you are. And understanding and respecting that relationship, I think, is really key. And slowly handling things so that there's an agreement and a level of respect on both sides, that things can be done well on all aspects of care, be it financial, physical living space, medical, you name it. But I think that's really important.
So it almost sounds like you need to have a team around you, right? Because when I think of, these are all very different things, right? When you think about, I think about this kind of in the picture of mitigating risk, right? Like, how do I keep a parent healthy and safe and feeling secure? And I think about what you just said around, money, the physical space, health, wellness, et cetera, but that might require having different people come in at different moments and times to help you navigate all the complexities of what that means then, even from the larger legal umbrella under which it all falls.
Correct. And the team will change, guaranteed. Whatever they had, you'll probably bring in your own. You'll see problems that are going on as we age, or as your parents age. It's very easy for somebody to come in that they trust, that may not necessarily have their best interest at heart. So I say, let go fast. Get rid of them. Don't ask questions. Just say thank you, goodbye, adios, see you later, good riddance, whatever. Yeah, and that goes from medical doctors, you name it. It runs the gamut. AIDS. I was talking to a friend whose wife passed away from early stage Alzheimer's, and we laughed about the number of AIDS that we had. And I said, yeah, people burn out. It's okay. It happens.
So in assembling this team, Nancy, in the same way that you interview for a job, I would imagine that there's some similarities to understanding that moment in time that like you mentioned, your parents getting lost on the way to your house. But there are also probably red flags that accompany the legal, the financial, the other things that we should be paying attention to. How do you truly identify, like, when is something just, an error or a mistake versus when is something maybe negligence or, abuse or fraud, to be honest with you?
Well, I saw the red flags long before I took over as POA. So, and I've been trying to get my dad out of a relationship with both an attorney and a financial advisor. The financial advisor recommended an attorney, probably not a great scenario or situation. The accountant was also in cahoots with the attorney and the financial advisor. So when you see those kind of relationships, I know big financial services firms will do that, because they try and, especially with family offices, they try and do that. I'm not an advocate of that. I think you need to take time to verify that, in fact, those individuals are correct for you. And if there's any suspicion that, especially after a certain age, that they're trying to sell something for a tax advantage, unless you're ultra wealthy, and even then, those things should have been shored up a long time ago to make sure that what was ever going to happen at a later stage in life was going to provide the right income for the parent, and not forget the children. We should be second thought.
What advice do you have for those of us who are balancing everything that we're talking about here, in the sense of understanding that there may have been years lost in the sense of losing touch with parents, and wanting to ensure that in the time that you do have left, whether it's a year, 5 years, 10 years, that you're really also, in addition to playing that, that elder care advocate role, that you are also emotionally reconnecting and re-engaging to the extent possible, particularly then when it's also complicated by things like dementia or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or, whatever the other chronic condition may be as a part of the natural aging process.
So how to reconnect, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Or just stay engaged where, your relationship really truly is fulfilling for both of you in those moments and times where mentally it may not be the same relationship, if that makes sense.
Well, that was pretty easy for me, actually, because, as you get older, you separate. You go off and have your own lives. One of the things that I did with my folks, and especially with my dad, is when I was younger, I went to camp. I loved camp, sleepaway camp. You know, the further away from mom and dad I was, the happier I was as a kid. And throw me in the woods, and that was great. But my folks would always send me letters. So what I started for my dad, and he was always interested in my business and what was going on. Mom less so, but my dad was always engaged. So I did a reverse, what I call letters from camp. And every week on Sunday evening, I would take all the photos off my phone that be walking down Fifth Avenue, take, oh, look, there are the windows and Saks. You know, I take snapshots of everything. And I did a photo letter, just write up a letter for Dad and send out. Sometimes it was 2 pages, sometimes it was 6 pages with little photos and notes of what was going on in the course of the day or my business or people that I met. And he loved it. So once a week, he'd get what I call Nancy's letters from camp, which is my business life. And now for Mom, Mom's not as interested and engaged in that because Dad passed away last year. But, I send Mom cards. I have like tons of cards. Valentine's Day, I got like 20 cards. I still have Valentine cards. I'll send her a Valentine card in the middle of January and say, hey, Mom, I love you. Or, just little fun things like that. Camera phones, they didn't get along well with. It just didn't work. It used to be email Mom and snail mail Dad. And when Mom got dementia, well, there goes the email because she forgot all the passwords. But, and some other things I did, like I went on Groupon once, and I think it was about 3 years ago now when Dad was 97, and I took him on a helicopter ride. And we went over to Tampa Bay. Tough getting, a guy with severe arthritis and a walker into a helicopter, but 3 of us stuffed him into the front of the helicopter and off we went. Then I rented a small, I wouldn't call it a yacht, but they called it a mini yacht, and took all our aides and their families and my family and friends, and we did a yacht trip around Tampa Harbor because I couldn't take Mom and Dad on a cruise. It was just too dangerous. So we, 4-hour cruise in the harbor was what we did. And I do things like that.
It's interesting as I'm listening to you talking, I'm also thinking of like the joy that it brings to you to the caretaker herself or himself, in the sense of, having those experiences and those memories, right? Because what you're doing is you're creating memories both for them and however they hold that as a memory, and then for you as well. And I would imagine that there's, also a part of a psychological acceptance and coming to terms and just, the need to be in the moment when you're with elderly relatives who may not be the same as you remember them, right? So talk to us a bit about what that experience is like, in the sense of what sort of self-care should we be practicing as we're caring for others, but then also ensuring that we're staying in check with our own emotions and how to handle for us whatever the joy, the sorrow, the grief, the loss comes up for us during this time period.
I think the biggest and most important word to use here is to be gentle with them and to be gentle with yourself. And early on, I get frustrated and I would just like, go, 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 go. It's like, I'm going to get even with them. They drove me like nuts when I was a kid. So I'm going to do the same thing, right? On reverse. Well, I that wasn't so good, Nance. You just like chill out a little bit. So I learned to just pull back and just take a deep breath. Little moments, like my dad loved to go for car rides. So I'd go down and visit. We'd go for long drives and he'd tell great stories and we'd have lunch together. Mom didn't like the rides. It was okay. And we had some great times together. So it's the little things that make so much of a difference. And the end hurts. It doesn't matter what it is. It's going to hurt. And you don't have to be a dog with a bone with your parents. Everybody else, that's a whole nother story.
What do you hope to achieve with CareManity, in the sense of the way in which you reach others who are going through, similar experiences?
Well, we're slowly building a platform, but right now, just to sort of test things, I've got a small Facebook group called ElderCare Success. Anybody is welcome to join. Although I limit service providers. Unless I know them or have some approval, we just don't do it. And it's really about the quality and the privacy of the caregiver and what we're going through, so we can handle those. And that's on Facebook, ElderCare Success. Anybody can join. We're doing a podcast, which is really called Doing It Best with ElderCare Success. You'll see a picture of me and my dad on that helicopter ride. And so, ultimately the goal will be to help people navigate this whole process in a very logical format, because there are phases of care that I don't see being presented out there. It's all over the place. There's lots of information. It's 1,000 miles wide and an inch deep, unless you're a medical professional, and that's overwhelming. So if we can organize it to save time, save money, and anxiety, I mean, those are the three things that we really need to worry about for ourselves, and quite frankly, for our parents. It goes into three simple buckets.
And in the people that you're meeting to date, in the conversations you're having, what are some of your biggest aha moments, in the sense of what's really surprising you in those conversations?
Well, the fear of being alone and going through this. I just got a note from before we got on together from somebody who I wasn't sure whether it was a snoop trying to come in and like take advantage of people. So I will say, if you don't answer my questions, it's like no soup for you kind of thing. Is what I say. And and she said, no, I was afraid to share my information, but thank you for reaching out. And she felt comfortable privately saying, I feel all alone. My mom's got breast cancer. I don't know what to do. My dad died when I was 18. I'm afraid of being alone. How do I handle this? So that's a big one. The other one was really, I've been in the board space for a long time, and moving over to an entirely different industry, I wasn't sure how it would be received. And I am blown away at the response, excuse me, from people who are saying, can you tell me more about that? Like, what was your experience? And just being able to share. It's fascinating. And they've been very welcoming, which I'm glad to see. The medical professionals, they get into their thing, but it's people like, normal, I don't say they're not normal people, business professionals like ourselves, that are saying, how do I do it? We're trained to be parents. We're not trained to manage the end of life. And it's something we don't talk about openly.
So I love these examples, and I think it also shows a vulnerability to ask for help, right? And that's often something that women really struggle with, because we feel like we have all the answers.
Well, men are worse at it, interestingly enough.
I'm sorry, Nancy, say it again.
Men are even more, it becomes more difficult for the men to even ask for help, which is very interesting.
That is interesting. Do you think, so here's a question for you. So when I say, women don't often ask for help, we don't often ask for help in the workplace, right? Because there's a lot of different sociological reasons for that. But I'm wondering, in your reflections and your experiences and having these conversations with men, is it that they're not asking for help because they're so used to knowing what to do in their careers, that then when it transfers over to something that requires a whole different set of emotional intelligence skills, let's say, that's more challenging from a gender perspective? Do you see that play out in a different way?
The men who are engaged as overseers or caregivers for their parents are very engaged. But I think opening up to the vulnerability aspect is difficult. And I'm not sure whether it's the same with them talking to other men about it. But when I get them quietly by themselves or just talking one-on-one, it's like a dump. It's very interesting to hear how that works. And then also, it's like 60% of the caregivers out there are women. The guys will handle the legal and financial if there's brothers and sisters. And then typically it's the women who are told, oh, no, you do that stuff over there. It's like, we don't help mom in the shower, kind of thing, or even dad in the shower. You do that. Or little thing, going to the doctor. But more and more women are also involved in managing the legal and the financial and the medical. I mean, everything, the whole package, because sometimes their brothers or their male peers don't want to have anything to do with that either. So, and we know how to ask in many ways, but we don't know how to ask the right questions on this front.
That's such an interesting point. Can you talk more about that? Let's peel that back a little bit in the sense of, so let's just say that, going back to your example of the woman you talked to whose mother has breast cancer and her father's gone, and she feels like she's very alone in this. So what then becomes the next set of first steps as she embarks on, how to manage this?
Well, the first thing I say is, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid of asking what you think are stupid questions, because there are no stupid questions. And the fact that she said she felt alone was really empowered to me. I think that was a very empowering statement for her to sort of expose herself like that. And, for men too, to say, I'm alone. I don't know what to do. How do I handle this? There are no stupid questions. It's very simple. You just say, how do you handle this? I don't know what to do. To admit that you don't have the answer is okay. And just being okay with okay is fine. And there is no perfect. You can't fix the fact that at some point there is going to be a last day of life and a last breath. And the goal, at least for me, with my dad and my mom, was to make it as for my dad to make it as gentle and as caring as possible. So, I mean, I knew what he wanted. I say it was, I called it Mom and Dad Inc. And half jokingly but true, I'll send you a blog post that I did for somebody that I joke and say my mom and dad have been preparing me for their death since I was 5. And it's true. Because they told me what to do, what to expect if something happened to them. I was the eldest, so I always knew how to call the doctor on my little plastic red telephone when I was 5. May have not reached the doctor on that one, but I knew how to do it. All the way through to the end, where I knew what their finances were and where the accountant was and where the attorney was and how to fix the finances that got screwed up by somebody else. I knew how to do it. Took time, but I did it.
So, and ideally, and again, life is not ideal, but these conversations would be happening, much earlier in life too, right? And so then to your point, that they do have a large role in the process by which then everything else unfolds, right? So you have some sense of assuredness that the decisions are actually grounded in their wishes and desires as well.
Right. There's a book by Atwal Gawande called Being Mortal that I would highly recommend for everybody. If you haven't had a conversation like this with your parents, or even with your own children or family members, have it. It's not saying that tomorrow you're going to die. It's not like the woo-woo syndrome, right? but taking the pressure off of somebody that will be there for you at the end so that they know what you want, as opposed to having to make the decision for you, is the biggest gift that you can give to somebody, quite frankly. And it doesn't need to be difficult. It can happen over time. It doesn't have to happen all at once. It can be an ongoing story, and it can change. It's all right.
Nancy, let's talk about your book, How to Survive 911 Medical Emergencies. Talk to us about, I love that title, number one. It's so clear and really drives home, I think the importance of the work that you're doing.
Good. I'm glad that the title worked. That was a hard one to come up with. So the book is called How to Survive 911 Medical Emergencies. It's a step-by-step guide before, during, and after. It's a very simple book. It's written literally for a 4th grade education level so that anybody can read it. And that's not saying it's been dumbed down, because the information is not dumbed down. But it takes families through, how do you set up your home in case you do need to call 911 and an emergency responder needs to arrive. Things like I've had friends or people that I know say, we went to mom and dad's house and found that they've been hoarding. And we couldn't even get in the door. That's dangerous if you've got a gurney that you need to get in, or medical equipment to get in there to save somebody's life and you can't physically get to them. So how do you set that up? Even to the point where how to have the right numbers on your house so somebody driving by can see it. Talking to firefighters and first responders and police, they said you'd be surprised how many people don't have that, and especially in rural communities. And even in the city, you can have buildings that don't have numbers on them. How do they get there? So that's the beginning. Then it's, what do you do to prepare to make sure that the firefighters or the responders have everything they need? There's something called a file of life. And if anybody wants a file of life, we have them free of charge. It's how to survive 911.com. You can get a free file of life there. All it is all your medical information in a very detailed format that the responder gets. Now, it's not detailed like your doctor is going to get, but it's enough information for them to know if they do something, they're not going to kill you. Hopefully. To the hospital. Then we go over, how to get the best care in the emergency department, what to do in the hospital, how to get discharged faster, where you're going, what to do where you're going. And then we have a final chapter that actually deals with what happens during man-made or natural disasters when the 911 system gets out or a responder can't get to you. How do you handle things there? So it's 112 pages. It's very simple checklist. You name it, it's all in there.
Thank you, Nancy. That sounds like a great resource, and we'll put that up on the screen for everyone as well if we haven't already.
I'm kind of passionate about this. So.
No, but it's you bring up so many interesting things I think we just all take for granted, like the story of medical providers not being able to open a door because they've discovered mom and dad have been hoarding. All those little things that are along the way, right? Where so this leads me to my next question, in the sense of when we think about parents or relatives aging, we often think about like the kind of the emotional impact to them when things are taken, when rights and privileges and access is removed from them, right? So I think immediately about what happens when they fall down one too many times, and maybe living alone isn't the right thing to do anymore. Or driving, or those day-to-day things that we all take for granted that really can emotionally impact, and then because of that impact them physically, impact just their will and desire to be themselves, right? And to continue adopting and being flexible to be able to change to whatever that new environment is. Talk to us a bit about like how do we help them prepare for that? And how do we ourselves prepare when we no longer see mom and dad driving, or when they have to move to an assisted care facility or a rest home, or, all of those other things that happen that impact just the day-to-day activities?
Well, I'm an advocate of keeping mom and dad at home as long as you possibly can. I'm not a big fan of care facilities, although I know not everybody can do what I've been able to do, and that's okay. But it's helping them know that it's okay to slow down. They're going to physically feel it. Your joints get a little sore. You want to sleep a little bit more. You don't have the same appetite that you did before. Depression can set in, which is something to really watch out for. Are they separating themselves from family members or even their community? How do they do that? And finding ways to help them along that path so that they can stay engaged as much as possible is important, because just because you're old doesn't mean you're like dead yet. I hate to say it, right? It's not over until it's over. But I think there are many ways to get engaged and find ways to do it. So, helping them to be a little gentle on themselves, and knowing that you don't have to swoop down and save them. It's going to happen slowly and easily, and just be careful with yourself. Organize and manage things the best way you can. And if you can't do it all at once. Your job is not to be their savior. Your job is still to be their child and to be there for them.
Nancy, let's shift gears a bit, because I also wanted to make sure we have time to talk about your board work.
Sure.
Let's approach this kind of at a macro level. Talk to us about the importance of women serving on boards, and what has that meant for you in the work that you've done with BoardBench?
Sure. It's important to serve for women to serve on boards. It's important for just diversity in the boardroom in general. And it was funny. I was given a link to an old video of Long Island and about the story of Newsday and how it started. I grew up in Long Island, and they talked about the men in the boardroom. And I thought, oh my God, this is like the stereotypical, the glasses, the bald hair, than they do today, but they were still all men in the same white shirts and the black suit, the black ties. And in this particular case, Newsday was started by a woman, which a lot of people may not know. So they all reported to a female CEO, which was quite interesting for the day. If we had more of that back then, I think it would be we'd be in a very different place than we are today. But having the diversity of experience is critical ultimately to the company because the customers are of a diverse base. And years back, a woman who had been a client and then became a friend said, Nancy, I was the first woman on a board. And the women in the union at this particular company, utility, came and wanted to talk to me. And the CEO freaked because they didn't have a conversation with her, not them. And she was important. So legal counsel had to get involved before she was really allowed to say much. But it was interesting to see how excited, enthusiastic the workforce, the percentage of the workforce was to see somebody like them on the board. I think that's important.
Let's talk about today the balance between ensuring that you have the right skill set on a board and then also ensuring that you're bringing board members on where there's a really good culture fit as well, but ensuring that boards then are very diverse and not just resembling the past.
Right. So let's talk about the skill set first. And if you're talking from the candidate side, I get lots of calls from men and women who want to be on boards. And I think it's sort of like the masses are sort of going for the doors kind of thing right now, which is okay. But there's probably about a good 40% of them who are not qualified to be on boards. And that's because they really haven't had much operational experience. They've been in service areas, they have been fairly low level, and somebody likes them and says, oh, you'd be a great person for the board just because ultimately they're a nice person. Well, there's a lot more to it. One of the key things that every board member has to have is a sound financial education and knowing how to read financials and understand what they mean and get into the weeds if necessary on that, to have a better understanding of who the customer base is. I think that's critical. To understand the legal implications, the risk factors that are going on, to understand the industry that the company is in and take a maniacal fascination on what's happening, not just in that one, but everything that touches it. So I think boards, in many cases, have gotten a little too narrow focused on solving the problems of compliance, and that's crept up. And we now have to step back and say, how do we take a broader vision or broader view of what's out there and what might come up and bite the butt of the company that we serve on, right? So that's from the candidate perspective. And you wanted to go into next was
culture fit. Because that's also a big part of, understanding that, you might have an incredible skill set fit, but maybe not right in terms of just fitting into the culture of the board and the organization and the mission, vision, values of the company.
So there's nothing worse than having the one PITA on the board. And if it isn't a PIT, it's a pain in the, and I'll often get a call. I got a call from a law firm the other day saying, so how do you handle board evaluations? I said, well, you can do all this research, you can do all the charts and whatever else, but ultimately the best board evaluation comes down to a conversation. And if you can't have the conversation, all the testing in the world is out the door. And usually there's something that's going on that doesn't work. So the other day, somebody called and said, can you help a potential client of mine? We've got something going on between the chairman and the CEO. And I said, oh, you want to get rid of the CEO? I say, no, we want to get rid of the chairman. I don't think that boards understand how to use, I'll call it their EQ, IQ, or their intuition well enough when they're talking to somebody. And they tend to, I'll use the term buy a new director because they're enamored with the star. Mm-hmm. And they really don't peel back the layers of the individual and get to know how the head and the heart and the capabilities, the skill set, the competencies work together in a unit. So that's really critical. And usually, I say there's a sort of an analogy that we have in my office is that you can have a beautiful glass of wine and you put 1 teaspoon of sewage in it. You still have you still have a glass of sewage, right? And if you have a beautiful glass of sewage and you put 1 teaspoon of wine in it, you still have. So be careful what you put in your wine. How's that for a story?
That's amazing. I love that. And that analogy can be used almost anywhere.
Yeah. So if you're a board member and you're looking to bring on another board member, really, I mean, look at the person. Don't be starstruck because they're a good salesperson. You really want to see where their vulnerabilities are and what's going to happen when they come up against a wall.
Mm-hmm. Nancy, I can't help but think about, the year 2020 and and all of the I think the joys, the challenges, the struggles, the amount of anxiety that it's posed for people and companies, honestly, in the sense of how do you lead through this period of time. What could boards be learning differently about this period of time in the sense of how they ensure that they're not just fulfilling their fiduciary responsibilities, but they're actually adding value to what they should be doing?
This is a really hard time, I would say, for most directors because they are not able to be as engaged in a company physically, like, go and walk the hallways as they would otherwise. And typically, there's been sort of this veil between the board and beyond the CEO in that respect, and that which is great because you don't want to override a CEO and say that you don't trust them either. But honestly, a good CEO will come to a board and say, I need your strength to say, how do we get through this time? And ideally, if the board is strong, they will be creative and they will rise to the challenge and say, how do we have different conversations with the employee base? How do we understand what's going on in the customer base? And I'm not sure enough of that is going on because they're overwhelmed with how do you keep companies afloat right now? And they, that blinder focus of, well, we can do it all on Zoom and we can do it all on Skype or, whatever is probably not a great comfort level. And they're overwhelmed. There's a lot more going on. Companies are being delisted or halting trading, and companies that never should have been public are running into trouble. So, the rush to be public is probably not a great idea right now. I grant it. Capital markets are good for business in many ways, but think about the bigger scheme of things and how to be a little bit more creative. And typically, boards, I'm going to go on a limb. Typically, boards are not overly creative in problem solving. So. Shoot me now. It's okay.
Well, that brings me to my next question. This is a perfect segue. So for those of us who do serve on boards, what kind of questions should we be asking differently right now? And I ask this because, my experience with boards, there's a difference between being too granular in the detail that you're really missing what's happening from the bird's eye view, right? And it's really usually through the bird's eye view that you start to see patterns, or you pick up on things that may seem askew. Or you seize opportunities because of that ability to see the forest through the trees. But for those of us that do sit on boards, how really should we think about a different kind of engagement that's not too granular, but yet still very impactful and important?
Well, I think you have to open the line of communication with the senior team even more than it has been in the past. And if you've got a trusting CEO and a trusted relationship and a good communication between a chairman and CEO, that should work well. And figure out how that's going to work. So you be a little creative. Yes, you still need the granular details. You still need to go with what's going on in the market, but you need to, like you said, step back. And that ability to step back is very difficult. So early on in my career, I took some art. I took an art class. I've got a degree in art, among other things, interestingly enough. And I had a professor who forced us to draw with what they call the Conti crayon on the end of a 3.5 foot long stick. So it was taped to the end of the stick. And we were constantly forced to stand back and draw the outside images of the figures that we were drawing. So you didn't look at the figure, which we'll call the granular component of the business, right? You actually had to draw the the white space. So that gave you a very different look of how the composition of the visual worked. And boards need to really do the same thing. If they can step back with, we'll say, the concept of a virtual stick and look at the white space around the business, then it's going to be difficult to do. It's uncomfortable. It's like, switching your arms from left to right and using a different skill set. But that's going to show them the hidden things that are going on. And even if there's something that they see a spark off of the left side of their eye, it's, to be able to even identify it today would be huge for a board.
Nancy, for those of us who maybe don't sit on boards right now, but are used to sitting on nonprofit boards, for example, let's talk about quickly from what you see in the sense of the distinct differences between, in what instances is is your passion more aligned with serving on a nonprofit board versus then what are the benefits of serving on a corporate board?
Well, I say don't ever join a not-for-profit board unless you're absolutely passionate about the mission. They are mission-driven companies that have to run at a profit in order to continue on with their mission, and never forget that. Sometimes management of a smaller not-for-profit will forget it, but yes, it's about show me the money in the not-for-profit so you can do more for others. And that has to be instilled, but never join a nonprofit with the idea of getting on a for-profit board. It typically doesn't work that way. Even if they're big names, they write a check and they don't show up. So understand that. But the benefits are very rewarding. If you can do well by doing good, that's a good thing. You also learn a lot of different skills on a not-for-profit board. If it's a well-run board, is you understand a little bit of governance. You're going to know how much time it takes because a for-profit board takes time. If you're just going in for 4 or 6 meetings a year, well, forget it. Just don't do it. So you'll understand how finance committee works if you've never been there before. You'll understand how to ask questions in an environment that is somewhat safe to make mistakes, right? You can make mistakes by opening your mouth, but you can never make a mistake by actually wanting to do good for the mission of the institution.
So, don't you find that with philanthropic boards also a big part of it is your ability to help the organization raise money, right? And so either you're writing a check in your efforts and your participation is serving on that board and having the thank you come back to you in the sense of being able to see your efforts come to fruition in program development and execution. But there is often that heavy fundraising expectation that even to come on a board, you're expected to raise, depending upon what the organization is, but maybe, anywhere from, $5,000 to $40,000 and anything in between. What are the expectations that one has when they serve on a for-profit board? And then what are the rewards that come back to them?
So the expectations of the non-for-profit board will be, give or get scenario. What I find fascinating is a lot of these institutions are afraid to offend a board member who can't necessarily write the check themselves. And then they get into trouble by not getting the right people who know how to ask. So I was chair of a governance nominating governance committee for a large not-for-profit, and I got dinged because I told a lot of people they couldn't be on our board because I said, can you ask for money? Never ask a friend for money. Well, like next, and I explicitly wrote out, this is the rules. You give or get. And even if you can give, you have to go get. And these are the rules, the expectations. Can you ask your friends for money? If you can't ask for your friends for money, you can't join this board. If you need help asking, we'll show you how to ask. It's not difficult. If you're passionate about anything that you're serving for, it's very easy to ask somebody for something. You can learn to do it. If you're not passionate about it and uncomfortable making the ask, don't join that board. You shouldn't be on there. In fact, shame on that institution for even considering you, unless you're writing a check for $100 million, in which case you have to show up for a board meeting. Just write the check. But that also can be a danger because then you want to dominate the company. And I've seen this all because of that one. So, when there's trouble, it can happen.
Nancy, for women that really truly are interested in for-profit and corporate board positions, how do they go about identifying companies and available positions, and help us understand kind of that process?
So the first thing is to make sure that you are board worthy, I'll call it. And it's not like putting a little crown on and saying, "Oh, I'm sitting on a board member." And actually, I've actually seen personalities change where people have, totally ignored me, and all of a sudden, I wanted to talk to me. I'll say it's reversed. I wanted to talk to me like I was so important, and all of a sudden they get on a board, and I'm like, I'm nobody. It's like, fine. No, why did that personality change overnight? Probably not a great board member in the long run. But you want to make sure that you've got the skills and the competencies, that you've written out your bio and your resume, your board res. People say you don't need a board resume. I think that's nonsense. You want to know the history beyond just the titles of what you've been able to accomplish, because that lets me know how much you've done, so that you can see the flaws if there are the mistakes to happen, right? And it's a point of conversation as well. And then your board bio which is really an editorialized version of your board resume to show your personality a little bit, which is good. And then to find boards, you really have to understand which industries you're going to serve on and be good in. And let's say you worked at a beverage company, doesn't mean you're only good for food and CPG companies. There could be a variety of other things that tap into that, technology or marketing or other things. So understand every type of industry that taps into that and how they connect and support one another. So that gives you a broader range. And then know how to look for the right board. So a lot of people will go to the same organization looking for a board. And I use the story, I'm good on stories here. So I use the story that we live across from a reservoir, and early April, all the guys come out, and some of the women too, to go fish on April 1st, that first weekend. And they're all out there smoking the stogies and throwing back beers at 10 a.m. in the morning and eating their egg sandwiches and throwing their poles into the water until 5 o'clock at night. They're ready to go home. They're exhausted, and nobody's caught a fish. And I said, well, that's really great. They had a good time, but nobody's caught a fish. Nobody decided to take the time to drain the pond to see if there's a fish. So the same thing with board service. People who want to be on boards, they all go to the same darn pond. And there might be one guppy in the pond, and that poor guppy is like so jumped on by fishermen that they run out of oxygen and never want to come back. So being creative about which pond you're fishing in is really, really important for boards if you want to find one. So you're not going to find a whale in a pond.
Such good advice. And talk to us about the benefits of working with you, in the sense of, what opportunities become available from a board placement perspective. Because once you've done, the homework, and you have your board resume and your bio, and you've done your research, then is it, do you think about board placement in the same way that you think about a job search, right? Like, who typically, when you're looking for a job, typically either you connect with the hiring director or the CEO or HR, or whatever process you feel most comfortable with. Is the process similar for how you recruit to go onto a board? And what does that look like? And how is it different from those of us who may just be looking for employment positions as well?
So yes and no. Yeah. And first of all, I'm focused predominantly now on working with individuals who want to get on boards. Mm-hmm. And then on the board side, I'll share that a little later on, but I'm trying to teach boards how to do this themselves and never have to hire a research firm ever again. And they should be able to do it themselves well. But from the candidate side, you really need to look at it differently than looking for an executive position. If you're looking for an executive position at the same time, don't do it. Focus on one thing at a time. Otherwise, you're going to confuse people. I want to be the CEO, but I kind of want to be on the board too. Well, what conversation are we having? Quite frankly, anybody who's looking for a board candidate, it sounds very condescending. They're kind of the one focus. They're simple-minded at the time. I've got the job to fill. I want to find a board candidate. That's it. The CEO is another problem. That's another day, another dollar kind of thing to look at. So don't confuse them. It's, keep it simple, stupid, as they say, right? And you want to look, you want to look for people who are in the boardroom, but quite frankly, the person who has the most power when it comes to saying yay or nay to a director is the CEO. If you do not get along with the CEO, you're not going to get on that board. And the board members will say, oh, toxic, not good. Jan's toxic. We can't deal with that. Not good. Great person, maybe someplace else, but not here. So understand that. And, the accounting firms, the legal service firms, the general counsel, the heads of HR sometimes, but really it's that top relationship. Who is that CEO? Where do they need the help? And how can you make them shine?
Nancy, I want to close today with a thought. On the 100th anniversary of women getting the right to vote, you had posted something on social media. Your grandmother had served in World War I, and that you remarked that she'd be really impressed with the changes that have happened, of course, since that period of time. But sometimes we, feel that change happens very slowly when we think about, equity and inclusion and diversity in the workplace. And also just, the way that we live our personal lives on a day-to-day basis. You've said that great moments take time. How do we keep that in perspective right now?
Well, I want to take a step back. That social media post happened just on a total whim. I said, oh, this is pretty cool. What happened? And my grandmother was quite a character and drove a truck in World War I and served and supported the troops. But I was really surprised at the response. I overwhelmed by the response and how quick it went viral. So I've never had that happen. So I'm going to have to be a little bit more vocal about personal things. Great moments do take time. Anything worth doing, happens in small increments. Yes, I say if another joke I sort of say is, if patience is virtue, then I have none. But I have learned over the years that it takes time to make change, and small increments allow you to engage others that want to follow the excitement and the energy and do what's right. And what's right for you may not be what's right for somebody else. So understanding where the divide is so that you can serve a bigger audience and do more for the world takes time. It's not just out of the mouth.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much for your thoughts and your insights, your expertise. And you have to come back with us as well once your podcast launches. And can't wait to hear more about your work with ElderCare as well, because I think that as we all move forward and continue to live in the era of COVID, the work that you're doing is going to become even more incredibly important. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Can I just add one more thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah. People may not think that the work that I do in the boardroom has any connection to what I did for my folks. But one of the things I learned towards the end of my dad's life is how much the two really did intersect. Mm-hmm. And at one point, a medical team did not want to provide any care for my father. They were just going to say, SOL, too bad. And what I learned and I heard of was something called death panels that hospitals have as far as when they're going to decide. Now that's sort of the street name of it. But it's when they decide are they going to provide continued care for somebody of a certain age or not. I actually went before one of those death panels with a board of director person, legal counsel, the chief financial person, the compliance person, a chief surgeon, and my dad's surgeon. And I say, I kind of teared up at one point. I got it back together like in 2 seconds, but I was mad and I was not going to let them deal with that. After fighting with insurance, so actually, I called all the insurance companies that my dad had to make sure everything was covered. If it wasn't covered, do we have enough money in the account to finance it? Because I know that my father wanted to fight to the end, and I dealt with a financial advisor and a legal counsel. And I went in there armed, and I think they were surprised. But it was my dad's surgeon who said, if I didn't know the kind of care that Nancy is providing for her parents, I wouldn't be here supporting her. So in the scope of being a leader, an executive, you need to know when to fight your battles and who's going to be standing at your side. And that's something that we learn in the course of time. It's not something that we start out with. So there was a lot more connection than I realized. So thank you for letting me share that.
Of course, thank you. Thank you so much, Nancy. And would love to be able to continue this conversation with you as well. You have to come back very, very, very soon.
Anytime, just give me a call. You know where to find me.
I do. Thanks, everyone, for staying with us. I'm Jan Mershadam, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. Please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check us out at joinmayshad.com to learn more about how you too can become involved in this wonderful movement that we're creating together to help professional women connect, engage, and do business together. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. Hi, everyone. Please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to hit the bell to receive notifications of all of our upcoming content. Thanks, everyone. See you soon. Have a great day.